When's the last time you sat down at a game of Magic the Gathering and just thought, damn, is that a common? Because I know when I'm playing Modern, I definitely take Lightning Bolt for granted, being part of the original boon cycle and just being ubiquitous as a mono red threat and the marquee damage spell at 1 red. Or what about Legacy staple Daze, printed as a common way back in Nemesis and now defines identity in said format? I know many of you standard players though are really loving Llanowar Elves, a card that enables a lot more turn 3, maybe even turn 4 or 5 shenanigans a lot earlier than your opponents are ready for. The reason I'm bringing up these cards is that all of them are actually legal in Pauper, or at least at some point, because yes, Daze is banned being an absolutely absurd Magic card. But it got me thinking not only of these cards, but some of the interactions that these commons have. What it means to be a common has changed over time. And that's what I want to talk about today. An article from Alex Ullman, one of the Pauper greats, part of the Pauper format panel, put out an article around an edict, and I was reading it the other day thinking about some of my favorite Pauper interactions that I wanted to bring to you. If you like videos like this, then leave a like on the video and let me know what you want to see next. And as well, maybe comment down below what your favorite Pauper interaction is, and maybe I can get it here in this video. Timestamps down below. Let's hop right into it. Now, this is the article from Alex himself, Meet the Newest Edict Tearing Up the Pauper Metagame. And I thought this article was actually really interesting. I was just kind of going through this because I know there are a backlog of certain articles that I have, so I tend to go through them every so often. And this one specifically around Writhing Chrysalis brings up this unique interaction. So specifically, Accursed Marauder, 2 mana for a 2/1. Whenever Accursed Marauder enters, each player sacrifices a non-token creature. So very similar templating to a lot of kind of on enter the battlefield. I was going to say on play, being stuck in one piece. But enters the battlefield effects that gets you to sack a creature. You can then sack the creature that you played, but your opponent has to sack something as well. Specifically being non-creature though is really relevant against the Basking Broodscale combo. Going infinite with Sadistic Glee, you have cards like Writhing Chrysalis in there as well that are really powerful threats. Many Modern Horizons 3 draft players will also recognize this as an absolutely absurd common in recent times, but one where when it enters, it creates a bunch of Eldrazi spawn that can act as chump blockers, and then you block, sacrifice it, this thing grows bigger. It's just a great threat overall. And so when it comes to something like the Accursed Marauder, it provided something really interesting as a solution to a card like this. And I thought it was a very fun interaction because it would naturally go in the mono black decks or in the Orzhov decks kind of highlighted below, and I'd highly recommend you check out this article. It's a very short read, and I'm going to link it down below, but it got me thinking, as I mentioned in the beginning, about my favorite interactions in the Pauper format and how deep and diverse some of these cards can really be in their utility, because it's not just about playing play sets of cards that are generically good for your own combos and your own interactions. It's how you interact with what your opponent is doing and how you can circumvent some of the value that they have. So let me highlight this with the very first interaction that we have in such a broad metagame. Yes, burn is at the top 15% of the metagame, but you do have to be ready for everything else. Arguably, artifacts and affinity are at the top, but that's a discussion for a whole other video. Combo and aggression is at the top. You're either fast or you're gaining a bunch of life in Pauper right now. But more specifically in the Jund Broodscale combo. So again, highlighting the fact that, you have like the whole Sadistic Glee Broodscale combo. This deck specifically, I'm looking at something like Cleansing Wildfire. So we're ignoring the combo altogether. Red in 1 for a sorcery, destroy target land. Most land destruction has come traditionally in the modern age at 3, at 4, probably more if it's in a standard environment. Destroy target land, its controller may search their library for a basic land card, put it onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle their library and you draw a card. So traditionally you'd think off a level 1 that you would be destroying your opponent's lands. They get a basic. Maybe there's a lot of really powerful non-basics, which actually you would be correct to think so in Pauper, and then you would replace it by drawing a card. So there's a lot of bonuses to this. So the level 1 interaction with this is actually to target your own cards, because one of the most powerful effects that you have in Pauper is the affinity mechanic. So I shouldn't call it an effect, but really a synergy, an engine. And to enable this, we have these tap bridges, the tap duels. They're indestructible artifact lands that come in tapped but can tap for 2. So if you were to target this with the kind of Cleansing Wildfire, you would ramp, because you would not be able to destroy an indestructible land, but then you would instead look for a basic. So that's great. You get a little bit of ramp, you could have access to more mana, you can be more expensive. explosive. The idea behind this is on turn 2, if you can hit your own Dross for Bridge or whatever tapped artifact, you then start off at kind of 4 mana on turn 3, and then you're just off to the races from there. You can play a Writhing Chrysalis, and you're just ramping up to really good mana break points there. But the next piece is really against decks like the Gruul Ramp deck, also playing copies of Writhing Chrysalis, but really what I bring relevance to is decks that play Wild Growth and Utopia Sprawl. You'll notice that this deck is really only playing one, like, red forest and, one mountain and 15 forests. So there's a lot of ways where this deck needs to enchant a forest ASAP. And so being able to destroy any land is really powerful against matchups like this, where they might pile a bunch of things onto one land, and you learn over time as a Pauper player that you shouldn't be doing that. You should be able to spread it out. There are situations where you want to, especially if you want to enable this Arbor Elf, but of course, being able to grab that is really powerful. Notably, this is also a format with the bounce lands. So you will see decks like Dimir Terror, you will see the Turbo Fog decks, they'll also be playing these bounce duels. And so to be able to destroy those lands and set your opponent back on tempo and on value is really powerful. So again, a card that I find has a lot of really interesting effects in the main board that you're traditionally using for a ramp, but you can very easily turn it against your opponent to take away some of the value they have. And heck, you're replacing it by drawing a card. Again, Cleansing Wildfire, one of my favorite interactions and one of my favorite cards that has such versatility in the Pauper format. Now, the next interaction that I want to bring up specifically is in the Turbo Fog decks. Now, more recently, Turbo Fog has switched over to a black-green version. There is a little bit of blue because really in this version, what you're doing is you're fogging out and you're using Crypt Rats to be the primary source to win the game. Now, this is much better in a version of the metagame that is playing a bunch of burn. This is actually a more recent kind of iteration of this, and I don't think actually anything new came out for this deck. I think this version of the deck was, has been around for a bit. You could build into it. It's just a more kind of flavor of the day. And so you play something like the Stream of Thought, which was the blue-green version of Turbo Fog's win condition being mill, but you use this to shuffle your Crypt Rats back into your deck and kind of win from there. But in that blue-green Turbo Fog deck, one of the key cards that you'll see here is Arcane Denial, an EDH staple that many of you might be aware of. Blue and 1 for an instant counter target spell. Its controller may draw up to 2 cards at the beginning of the next turn's upkeep, and then you draw a card at the beginning of the next turn's upkeep. So you counter your opponent's game-winning spell or crazy threat, but they draw 2 cards, and then, I don't know, you replace it at the next upkeep. One of the most powerful things you can do in this deck is actually just spend 2 mana to draw 3 cards, which actually is really powerful. Something like Weather the Storm is one of the most common sideboard pieces, heck, even main board sometimes in the current metagame, especially with Burn and Aggression at the top, as I've been mentioning. Weather the Storm creates extra copies of spells that you can then counter with your own Arcane Denial to draw a bunch of cards. So imagine spending a bunch of mana to not only Weather the Storm, but also then allow the Weather the Storm to gain you some life and just take away one of the copies with Arcane Denial. So maybe you gain like 6 to 9 life instead of going up to 12, gaining that 12 life, 3 more. Counter that copy, draw 3 cards, and you're benefiting. You're not only getting yourself back into this game, undoing, 3 lightning bolts worth of damage, but then you're able to draw your way back into the game, maybe find a win condition. So one of my favorite interactions in the older versions of Turbo Fog that really helped you get back into the game and draw out really big, and really took use of Weather the Storms that were in the main board against matchups where you didn't really need the life. Against matchups where they were dealing damage to you in like kind of massive increments, and it wasn't like slow increments like Burn, where like one good resolve Weather the Storm really ended the game. One good resolve Weather Storm, generally speaking, this is a combat focused damage based metagame, so you're always going to have Weather the Storm. There's no real alt win cons in at common here. There's no Thassa's Oracle nonsense, but you want Weather the Storm to not only gain life, but you have extra value to then Arcane Denial your own copies and draw some cards. So again, one of my favorite interactions in Turbo Fog. Now, the next one that I want to mention specifically is in Bogles. Now, this is a ruling piece. Bogles has a lot of cool options. Gladescover Cow, Slippery Bogle, Silhana Ledgewalker, all commons, right? You have really cool options such as Malevolent Rubble, notably not actually common, or actually not printed, I should say, in Pioneer. I completely forgot that, yes, this is a Modern Horizon staple. Maybe at some point it'll be printed in a Pioneer. I think it's a really cool option that format would really like. But what I'm looking at right now, alongside all these enchantments that they can play, I'm looking at Armadillo Cloak. Now, Armadillo Cloak is actually a pseudo pacifism, because this second line of text, you'll notice the Oracle is worded this way. Whenever enchanted creature deals damage, you gain that much life. So you enchant a creature, it gets +2/+2 and has trample. But this isn't lifelink, and that's the key difference. Whenever enchanted creature deals damage, you, not the owner, not the controller, you, the owner of the spell. Yeah, I shouldn't say it is the owner, not the controller. You, the owner, gains that much life. So if your opponent is coming at you with something massive, throw an Armadillo Cloak onto it. And then all of a sudden, as per the trigger, you are gaining that much life. Obviously, you have to be a little bit careful because, if they have lethal damage, they're going to deal lethal and then the life trigger goes off. They deal the damage, state-based actions are checked, you lose the game, trigger on the Armadillo Cloak then goes off. So you have to be careful in that situation. But specifically in situations where you have more than enough life and your opponent's kind of beating you down with something big, throw the Armadillo Cloak onto that creature. Again, pseudo pacifism. It's like a cool little combat trick that not a lot of people are aware of. And again, it is not lifelink. This isn't giving a creature lifelink. Lifelink will give, life to the creature's controller. That's how the word that's how it's worded. Read the literal enchantment lifelink. That is what it is. So in many ways, if you were to give a creature multiple instances of lifelink, it would just gain life once. But also when you put it on your own Bogle, if you put lifelink on a Bogle with Armadillo Cloak, you would gain double the amount of life. You'd gain 2 times the amount. So it's actually like really nice that way. Now in this specific case, you do have obviously you do lose a lot. Armadillo Cloak is one of the key cards in Bogles. Now, I hope I didn't misspeak on the whole lifelink versus Armadillo Cloak interaction. It's been a minute since I played Bogles, but I'm noting this as one of the key cards because trample is absolutely massive in this format. So I really want to highlight this as maybe very much a last minute options. If you can give your Bogle trample and make it a little bit bigger, you probably want to give it trample. Again, as I was highlighting that Rising Chrysalis is everywhere. Writhing Chrysalis, if I could speak. There are a lot of chump blockers in this format. So board wipes that are at an all-time high. Going over top with burn spells are at an all-time high. And so again, giving yourself trample is going to be powerful. This is a niche scenario interaction, but again, one where if you have that trick up your sleeve, it's a great interaction. One of the last interactions that I want to bring up is in Cycle Storm. Now, for many of you that may not be aware of how this combo deck works, let me run you through it, and then we can talk about the interaction specifically. It's one that Brian Cook of the Epic Storm always loves to highlight. It's one of my favorite ones to point out as well. So Cycle Storm works with a bunch of cyclers. So you have a bunch of cards that cycle either for free in Street Wraith, which yes, is a common, or something like Granite Healer that cycles for 1 generic. A lot of cards in the deck will cycle for 1 blue, 1 black, whatever. This card specifically reads whenever you cycle a card, you gain 1 life. Okay, so there are payoffs like this that if you have out on the field, you can have some type of interaction, something positive happens for you. So keep that in mind. So you have cheap cyclers, and then you have permanents that take advantage of you cycling. Now, obviously, you got to have mana for this. You can't just be cycling crazy amount of cards, right? Well, you have something like Songs of the Dam, because all your cyclers, or most of your cyclers, are creatures. So you're going to be putting creatures into your yard. Songs of the Dam is insane as a common. As I was saying earlier in the video, it's crazy that a lot of these cards were printed as common way back then. Ice Age has this as a common. One of the key combo pieces in any format that this is legal in. And so you add black for each creature card in your graveyard. So primarily you're looking at cyclers that can cycle for black. You're not looking for much else, or colorless cyclers. And so you gain a bunch of mana. Okay, but then what if you whiff? You can't just keep drawing into more and more cyclers. You have lands, you have spells. That's where something like Reaping the Graves comes into play. One of the better cards with Storm out there, not modern legal, but Pauper legal, because yes, Scourge printed this as a common. Again, a highlight of how cards like this should not be printed again, because if they were, they would probably be mythics. Return target creature card from your graveyard to your hand. So you can imagine you fill up your graveyard with a bunch of cyclers, you add a bunch of mana, you Reaping the Graves, you repeat the process. Your payoff then is eventually filter into some amount of mana with various different methods and play something like Granite Stinger. You cycle another card, Granite Stinger deals 1 damage to each opponent. Great. The big thing I want to highlight here is eventually you run into these situations where, yeah, maybe your opponent has a ton of life or you don't have many cards left. How do you win the game in that sense? Well, if your opponent has a bunch of life, that means you're probably going to have to cycle more than the amount of cards in your deck. And if you have a few cards in your deck, you might mill out. The big way you get around this is you actually respond to the draw trigger of the cycle. You order your triggers the right way, where whenever you cycle the card, you make it so that the damage on the Draenei Stinger resolves first, you respond to the draw trigger, and you cycle again. A lot of your spells are instant speed. You can cycle at instant speed. Reaping the Graves is an instant. Songs of the Dam is an instant. A lot of your tutors, such as, if we go back into the list here, a lot of your tutors like Mystical Teachings is an instant, which grabs another instant. So you can respond to all of these triggers in response to your draw trigger, so you never deck out. You can, well, I shouldn't say never, you almost never deck out. You can loop yourself to really high amounts of damage. You could play on multiple Draenei Stingers, there's 4 in the deck, and you could be doing large chunks of damage from there. There's a whole lot of recursion, whole lot of reanimation, and again, the interaction of the fact that you can actually beat yourself not decking out by responding to the trigger of the draw to continue to cycle, continue to cast your spells, is a really powerful interaction, and one of the many reasons why combo decks are so cool in Pauper. It's, you know, look, I'll be honest, I've been a mill player for so long, I've been very hesitant to explore different decks. I played humans for a little bit, I played dredge, all that stuff. And one of the things I'm happy about with Pauper is it really helped me explore myself as a Magic player and really grow an appreciation for combo decks because of stuff like this. And because of something like Pauper, I'm exploring Legacy. I'm exploring it now through kind of mono red Painter, and I eventually want to get into the Epic Storm. I think like, well, decks like that are really something that draw me. I like the puzzle. I like working around the interaction that my opponents might have, and I really like that optionality. I honestly think at heart, being an alternate win condition player, I'm a combo player at heart. And again, Pauper and interactions like this and Cycle Storm in the format have really helped grow that love for me. Now, the last section, I just want to walk through my baby of the format. Like, I've been playing Affinity since the beginning. I don't want to sound like old unk boomer status, whatever. Let me know in the comment section down below if you've been playing Affinity since the ATOG days. How long have you been playing Affinity for? Have you been playing since Carapace Forger? Carapace Forger is green and 1 for a 2/2. It gets +2/+2 if you have 3 or more artifacts. A 2 mana 4/4. Back when Carapace Forger was actually legitimate, back when ATOG Fling was the win condition, where you sacrifice all your ATOGs or all your artifacts, flung your ATOG at your opponent's face. Heck, you even attack with it. Back when that was the Affinity win condition, way before, before the tapped artifact lands. That's how long I've been playing. And I've gone through every iteration of Affinity. So I just want to use this moment to just highlight one of my favorite decks in the format. I understand your opinion if you hate the artifact package and all that stuff, but past that, let's talk about some interesting pieces. So firstly, Kenku Artificer. This is a card, very simple, blue and 2. It's not really like that intuitive for people that play the deck at first, but when Kenku Artificer enters the battlefield, put 3/1/1 counters on up to 1 target non-creature artifact that becomes 0/0 homunculus artifact creature with flying. So essentially you create a 3/3 artifact with flying. So you think initially, oh yeah, I'll put that on my Ichor Wellspring, my Blood Fountain, but that's kind of bad. I can't really level up my like Mirror Enforcers into like 7/7s. No, you actually want to put that on your Mistfall Bridges, because your Mistfall Bridges then become indestructible 3/3s. Indestructible 3/3s with flying. Yeah, the card's really good for that purpose. Krark-Clan Shaman, sacrifice an artifact. Krark-Clan Shaman deals 1 damage to each creature without flying. Oh, so it's just sacrifice 1 artifact, it kills itself with the 1 damage, you can only get rid of X1s. Wrong. Remember, in response to the activation of the Krark-Clan Shaman, you can sacrifice an artifact, then maybe you sacrifice an Ichor Wellspring, you draw a card. Then what you do is, in response then to the damage trigger, you hold priority, you activate again, right? So you can hold priority, you can choose not to draw off the Ichor Wellspring. You can continue to hold priority and sacrifice as many artifacts as you want. The first damage trigger goes through, it will kill the Krark-Clan Shaman, but then you can then have the other damage triggers resolve and it will wipe everything else out. Notably, you will not be able to kill flyers. It is the biggest mistake you will make playing Affinity, playing with KCS. We've all been there. We thought we could clear out a board, but this doesn't kill flyers, but it can kill massive Mirror Enforcers. It can kill Gurmag Anglers. It can kill massive creatures if you hold priority and sacrifice your artifacts. Another common trick that a lot of Affinity players will use in that sense. Blood Fountain kind of counts as 3 artifacts, or no, two artifacts. So remember, when it enters It creates a blood token. So these are the things that you have to keep track of. Deadly Dispute is one of the key cards in Pauper, one of the key draw cards, and one of the reasons to be playing black, honestly. If you're playing black, you're playing Deadly Dispute in Pauper. As additional cost to this, you sacrifice an artifact or creature, you draw 2 cards, you create a treasure. So essentially what this is if you sacrifice a treasure, you are neutral on artifacts. You sacrifice an artifact, you gain an artifact with the treasure. So you essentially sacrifice nothing. That's the way you want to think about Deadly Dispute. Resource wise, you get rid of maybe like an Ichor Wellspring, which is great because when Wellspring enters, you draw a card, but when it dies, you then draw a card as well. So cast down with Ichor Wellspring becomes 2 mana, draw 3 cards, and you're still resource neutral on having enough artifacts out, which is going to matter for something like the Mirror Enforcers. And maybe, I don't know, if you want to put that on, if you want to turn your artifact, your treasure into a 3/3, I guess there's a world where that might be relevant. But again, super important to be understanding that resource wise, you are even on something like that. So there's a lot of situations where all of this stuff comes into play, some amount of mixture. Those are some of the things I wanted to throw at you, but ultimately those are some of my favorite interactions in the Pauper format. Let me know if if this taught you anything. Let me know if this made you think of other interactions down below. I'd love to hear them. And of course, if I got an interaction wrong, please let me know. I'm kind of worried about like the whole lifelink one that I mentioned. Maybe I should have researched that one a bit more. I was kind of going off the dome with that one because I was trying to remember way back to my more recent. I think I played like 2 months ago, 3 months ago. I played some Bogles, but hopefully if I got too much wrong, let me know in the comment section down below. And let me know again of your favorite interactions, what your favorite Pauper deck is right now. And honestly, most importantly, how are y'all feeling about Pauper right now? Burn is everywhere in the format. Is that bad? Is that good? I mean, Burn's been around for a while. Is it just the fact that Affinity and artifacts are everywhere? Should we be banning the tapped artifact lands? Sound off in the comment section down below.